Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and my voice is a little bit better today than it was in the last video, but it may not be 100% yet, so please bear with me on that. But today we are doing a long-awaited review, and that is of the ZMF Caldera. This is the open version. The Caldera series has a starting price of $3,500 US. Zach over at ZMF sent me this, the closed back Caldera, and a bunch of pads. I think like 8 pairs of pads and some tuning meshes to check out with the Calderas. That is a lot to do. So what I have decided to do is I'm going to break this ZMF Caldera thing into 3 parts. Today we're going to look at the open version in roughly stock form, and we'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. I'm going to do the same for the closed version in a few weeks here. In its stock form, and then there will be a part 3 of a Caldera series down the road where I get into pad rolling and checking out the meshes and all of that, provided that Zach and Bevan are able to allow me to hang on to these sets long enough to do that. Their schedule is different than mine, so hopefully that will pan out, but don't be shocked if it can't. All right, so again, $3,500 US starting price on these, and I think this is probably ZMF's best headphone. It's also a pretty good value as far as top-of-the-line headphones go out there in the market. So stick around after shameless self-promotion to find out why.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The Caldera has been around for a while now, so in this video I'm probably not going to go into as much detail as I do in most videos about the build and the specs and all of those kinds of things on this video, and I'm just going to kind of cut right to the sound and where I think this fits in the market here. And I think it fits in well, because I think $3,500 for this, you get a fair amount of sonic performance, and then of course you also get the artisanal nature of ZMF and the uniqueness of each unit because of the different patterns of wood grain and all of that, which comes with a significant pride of ownership when you get into the ZMF brand of headphones, and that's certainly not nothing. There is a lot to be said for that. Now, I said at the top of the video here that I'm going to review this in stock form. So what you see here is what I took out of the box, okay, that was sent to me from directly from ZMF. I believe this is the stock wood of American white oak, and I'm working on getting that confirmed, and I'll let you know if I do get that confirmed here. And then the pads right here would be the Caldera lambskin with the perforations on both the top and the sides right there. So this was the headphone as configured as I pulled it right out of the box directly from ZMF, and so this is what I have spent the most time listening to with it. Now, with the headphone here came 2 flavors of ZMF stock cable here, which is pretty well made and fairly ergonomically friendly cable. You can see even when it's coiled up, it has a slight bit of memory, but doesn't tangle much. And I got 2 flavors here. I got a 6.35 millimeter single-ended there, and then the same cable with a 4-pin XLR termination, okay, on the amp end there. So I used those cables. I also did some cable rolling here. I have some affinity adapters from Ginkgo/Dana Cable in recently that converts these mini XLRs here to a 3.5 millimeter, and I was able to use my Dana Cable Lazuli Rhapsody cable, and then also a friend lent me an Arctic Cables Opera V2, I believe, which was also terminated dual 3.5 millimeter, which I use on this with those adapters as well. Okay. But there again, like it's ZMF, so I mean you have the ZMF build and craftsmanship and beauty. The Caldera series is different than ZMF's others in that it is planar magnetic driver based instead of dynamic driver. And again, most of this stuff, because the Caldera has been around for a while now and because ZMF headphones are understandably popular and there's a lot of reviews out there about them, most of this stuff you already know. And so this is why at this point I am basically going to make the transition into talking about the other test gear that I used here and the sound and where this fits in the market. Because that's the one thing, my takes on those things are what I can provide for you that others have not already in a meaningful way. So, the test gear that I used here is really quite manifold, and I will try to hone in on the complete signal chains that I used here. So I used kind of a mid-fi signal chain that would have been, again, I'm an all-digital listener, and so I would have used Roon as a music serving service software here, either playing local files that would have been lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files, or streaming local or high-res FLAC files from Qobuz. Sort of a mid-fi signal chain there. The FIO SR11 streamer would have been a Roon endpoint, and that would have been feeding via USB a Geshelli Labs J2S DAC with a 4499 chip in it and Burson V7 Vivid op amps in it, and then I also have an aftermarket 12-volt LPS for that J2S as well. And then that would have been in turn feeding the Aoun S17 Pro Evo amplifier, which is in for review as well, so keep an eye out for that. All right, stepping up from there, I recently did a review of the Denefrips Pontus 15th Anniversary Edition. That would have been fed by either a Sonor Ultra Rendu and Singer SU6 combo, the Ultra Rendu being the Roon endpoint, and then the SU6 being a DDC, and then from there I2S into the Denefrips there. Or it would have been fed direct USB by a Mac Mini playing files that were upsampled either with HQ Player or Pangalactica Gargle Blaster. And then there was a third combination in there where I tried direct USB output from a Cord 2Go and 2U streamer and DDC combination in there as well. The Pontus took turns feeding either the HiFiMan Golden Wave Prelude amplifier or the Vioelectric HPA V281. Both took turns driving this for me there. I also used the live Harmony stack, which would be the Harmony DAC and the HP2A amplifier. Those would have been fed by a Roon endpoint that was that same Cord 2Go 2U DDC via USB through the matching micro DDC in there, and then I2S from there into the live Harmony DAC. And then the really high-end signal chain that I used here would have been either Sonor Ultra Rendu direct USB into my Lampezator Baltic 3 DAC, or the Sonor Ultra Rendu into the Singer SU6, and then AES connection into my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC. Both of those DACs would have spent time feeding the LTA Z10E amplifier. Okay. So that's a few different signal chains there and a few different sounds in there. And so now let's talk about the sound of the Caldera here, and very good. I was quite impressed with the overall performance, sonic performance that I got here. There has been a lot of talk in the headphone hobby about how ZMF headphones, they often have like this really appealing kind of organic, not sometimes very natural, but not always supernatural timbre kind of sound there. Super space natural, not supernatural timbre. Just want to be clear on that. Okay, sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't, but there is a level of engagement and magic to them that many people, and sometimes myself, find quite appealing. I personally have been a bit up and down on ZMF products. Some of them have been wonderful. Others I was less than thrilled about. But this one I am definitely in the wonderful camp on. I think this is really good. So, describing its sound, the overall perceived frequency response here is mostly neutral. There might be just a hint of like lower mid-range warmth to it, maybe just a slight treble peak, And the bass extension on it is okay, but not outstanding. But still, it's a mostly neutral headphone, maybe just a slight lower mid-range lean just a little bit and a treble peak. I don't know what shape you would say that that frequency response is, but that's what my ears are hearing here. It also has like a very dynamic and energetic kind of presentation. Like there's a fair amount of impact, particularly in the bass here. It's also quite resolving and has a fair amount of three-dimensionality and holography to its soundstage. And then through some parts of the frequency range here, that ZMF timbre, that really like kind of natural, smooth, and organic kind of sound to it is in here through a fair chunks of the frequency range as well. So let's get into all of that here a little bit further, particularly those presentational aspects, because we just talked about frequency response. Okay, I mentioned the dynamics here, particularly in the mid bass. There is quite a lot of oomph here. Again, there is a bit of roll off in the deep sub bass, so I don't necessarily consider this a very slammy headphone, but I would call it a punchy headphone. Kick drum hits, bass guitar string plucks, and all of that fall like probably in the 80 to 200 hertz range. If you can get in there, they have a fair amount of impact to them. And that makes this a pretty fun and engaging headphone for things like hard rock, heavy metal, hip hop, EDM, okay, those kinds of things there. Now you get up in through the mid-range, and the mid-range is pretty well tonally balanced. I don't perceive shoutiness or honkiness or nasally tone really from this headphone much at all. I have on some ZMFs in the past. This one is a lot smoother through the mids than many of ZMF's other offerings, at least to my ears here. And though there is, again, that like slight lower mid-range warmth. So male vocals, some deeper female vocals and all of that, they have a little bit more warmth and presence to them. Okay, lower string instruments, like the lower registers of violins and pianos. I realize piano is not a string instrument, okay, but violas, cellos, those kinds of things. They have, again, that same a little bit more warmth and fullness to them there through the mids. So like that is maybe just a little bit above what my ears perceive as like natural or real. But it is a level of presence that I think some listeners will perceive as natural and real and appreciate in terms of just the level of presence, and that helping some of those vocals and some like mid-range instruments that are carrying a lot of the melodies of music, help those stand out a little bit more than some of the competition, say like HiFiMan, and that little bit of a mid-range dip that they have sometimes in there. This is just a little bit more fully fleshed out, again, particularly in like the lower half of the mid-range register, I think, in there. So that's good. The treble tonality is maybe the relative weakness of like the tonality through the bass mid-range treble. The treble might be the relative weakness here, but not like an absolute or universal weakness or like a true fault kind of a thing. Just a hair of sibilance and a hair of like thinness and brittleness can come through in the treble, and like cymbal crashes and hi-hat hits and that sort of thing can sound just a little bit thin and metallic-y sometimes. If a track is already leaning a bit bright, that can double it down on this, and it can get a little bit harsh sometimes in there on that. But again, it's not outrageously bad. And it's not really out of line in my opinion, in terms of just like the amount of performance that we are reasonably able to expect here up at this price. Okay, so I mean that's kind of the tonality and the tonal balance of it all there. And I want to come back to those dynamics because I mentioned that it's punchy and all that. It's also well textured. But like mid-range snare drums have a nice snap to them and all of that kind of stuff too. And this kind of plays into, I think Zach has always had a pretty good ear for pretty realistic attack and decay timings. And that makes it in here too. I think that this headphone is pretty accurate on the attack, and then the decays hang around a convincing amount of time. They seem to be neither overdamped nor linger too much. They seem fairly realistic in their timing, at least to my ears there. And so that, I think, has always been one of the strengths of the ZMF house sound. I think Zach has always had a good ear for that, and that shows up again here in this headphone. Okay, resolution and detail retrieval are also strong. Room reverbs and like ghost notes on drum hits and like all of those subtle little things are here. It's also well balanced in terms of how it's presented. It doesn't strike me as being too forward nor too relaxed in there, striking a nice balance in there yet again. Texturing also comes through well. It is neither overemphasized nor too pulled back to my ear, and that sort of thing too. So I like the resolution. I like the detail retrieval. I like the way they are presented. I think they are pretty reasonable, well balanced, and fairly natural and realistic in how that's done. Okay, the three-dimensionality and like the spatial presentation and the holography and all that sort of thing. This is not a particularly big sound staging headphone. It's not what I would call intimate or claustrophobic. It's not big. Okay. So it is a little bit smaller scale in the terms of the size of the sound that the perception of space and the sound that you're getting. Now, within the space that it does create, it is fairly three-dimensional and quite holographic. The separation is strong. I think the separation is price appropriate, arguably a little bit better than one could normally expect for $3,500. We'll come back to that point. Okay, but it might not initially present that way to many listeners, because if you think about like HiFiMan or even like Focal with the Utopia, Odyssey with the LCD5 and LCD series and all that, they tend to be a little bit bigger than the Caldera Open in terms of the space they create. And so the separation between sounds is a little bit more noticeable. I don't want to call separation forward, because separation by definition is like where sound isn't. It's the space between adjacent sounds. And so how do you make a negative more forward? But what happens is, like, as the soundstage scales up on some of those other brand models, the sense of space between adjacent sounds proportionally expands with that. So it's a little bit more noticeable. So this one sounded like it was not as well separated spatially at first. The separation between instrument sounds and instrument and vocal sounds and all of that is good. No complaints there. I'm talking about spatial separation here. It's just like its smaller nature naturally means that proportionally the space between adjacent sounds is a little bit smaller. So it's easy to miss it first. I kind of had to really listen in there, but like I did pick it out. And once my brain was like, ah, yes, there it is, then like it just naturally filled in the rest for me. And it sounded, you know, nicely three-dimensional and spatially separated in all three dimensions there. All that. So let's then talk about that timbre that I mentioned. So the timbre here to my ears is not necessarily class leading as far as the broader market. It's on ZMF's stronger end. Like, again, Zach has always had a reputation for really natural timbre. And sometimes I hear that, like the original O Tour, I heard that. The Atrium Closed had it some here and there. The Atrium Open with the right kinds of music could get there as well. Okay, but this one is like on the better end in terms of the ZMF house sound. Now, some of the tuning issues that I mentioned there with the warmth of the lower half of the mid-range and then a slight treble peak here and there does mean that I think the timbre falls off a little bit relative to something like a HiFiMan HE1000 Unveiled, which is new, and I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Okay, but it's within the range that those tonal quirks that I mentioned are within the range that there's a broad swath of listeners out there, I imagine, who are not going to have timbre issues with this headphone, and they are going to say that timbre is one of the strengths. It's certainly far from poor to my ears. It's just a couple of those tuning quirks just are not quite there for me. But again, it's very close. And I want to emphasize that many listeners out there, it's going to be tuned such that they do really love the timbre on this headphone and find it quite natural and organic. Okay. So that's a lot of stuff. It's hinting at a lot of different things here. Let me do some comparisons as I normally do here. So what are we looking at here? So I just mentioned, and I just recently did a review of the HiFiMan HE1000 Unveiled. I got that out for a comparison. I got out my original Focal Utopia for a comparison. It also has affinity adapters on it, so that's kind of what they look like there. Okay, and then also the original HiFiMan Susvara. Okay, so let's kind of go through these one by one and compare them together here. First thing I'll say here as we get further into comparisons though is like the couple of days that I spent switching back and forth between all four of these different headphones, I had a permanent smile plastered across my face because it occurred to me that I had the distinct privilege of swapping between arguably four of the best headphones on earth. I'm not saying they are the four best, okay? But they are like in a group up there that is like, this group of headphones is like the best in the world. They are all four comfortably in that group there. And it just struck me. I had the distinct privilege of listening to great music on great headphones. And it was a reminder of why I do this and how much fun it was. Okay. So, I mean, that also says something about the Caldera Open, and like, it was right there in that group with them. And I was like really enjoying this process. So let's do a deep dive on this so that you as a potential buyer can make an informed decision here. So the HEC UV, or the HE1000 Unveiled, is currently $2,700 US as compared to $3,500 for the Caldera Open. And this is one of those things where it's like, I think that in total, the complete sonic packages of these two are roughly equal. So on pure sonics, the HE1000 Unveiled is arguably the better value these days, with the caveat that I shoot this in mid-March of 2025, and the Trump administration's tariffs are just starting to impact prices on Chinese-made goods, particularly audio gear here, and that applies to HiFiMan. So will this be $2,700 down the road when you're looking at, should I go Caldera or should I go HE1000 Unveiled? I don't know, okay? There's a very realistic possibility that this will end up in the lower 3,000s somewhere, which is really going to change the conversation again here between these two. Because again, I think they are roughly equal in terms of overall sonic package, but they don't sound the same. And so let's talk about that here real quick. The HE1000 Unveiled stage is much bigger than the Caldera Open is. So you get a much bigger soundstage. They are both about equal in terms of their three-dimensionality, and then their holography, the imaging, the separation, the depth, the layering, and all of that within their sound stages. Okay, roughly equal on that. It's just the HE1000 bigger, and so it kind of like that separation, that spatial separation I was talking about earlier, stands out a little bit more on the HiFiMan. So it feels like it has just a little bit more room to breathe. Okay, on there sometimes, which is neither good nor bad, just a preference thing for most people. The HE1000 Unveil is also going to have a little bit better bass extension, so it's going to reach down all the way down to like 20 hertz with very little roll-off, whereas the sub bass here is a little bit rolled off. The HE1000 is also going to have just a little bit more sub bass slam to it because of that added bass presence, but it is not as overall punchy or as dynamic as the Caldera is here. Okay, so the Caldera has just a little bit more active, dynamic kind of sound to it than the Unveiled does. The Unveiled's not poor there, it's just that the Caldera does it a little bit better. I think the overall tone and timbre to my ears and for the tuning that my ears need, I lean HE1000 Unveiled, but there are going to be plenty of viewers and listeners out there who are the opposite of me, and they prefer what the Caldera brings. Okay, because again, they are close enough on that it's just going to be in the ear of the beholder as to which one is better. HiFiMan working better for me. Could very well be that the Caldera works better for you. Come on. Cooperate so I can hold you up better. There we go. Okay, and so forth. So there is that. But in terms of like resolution, detail retrieval, texturing, okay, all of that kind of stuff, these two are basically dead even with each other. So why might you spend a little bit more then on the Caldera than you would on the HE1000 Unveiled? Well, maybe the tuning does work a little bit better for you and you get a little bit more realistic timbre, particularly because of that mid-range warmth that I was talking about earlier. That might work better for you here with the Caldera than it does with the HE1000. That's going to be for you to decide. Okay. The other reasons here, though, are like you get an American-made company that's not going to be tariffed here in a moment. You get the uniqueness, the craftsmanship, the artisanal nature of ZMF here. Okay, and so forth that you don't get with the very industrial looking and very mass produced, okay, HiFiMan HE1000s here. Okay, and that's going to be for you to decide whether or not those things matter. There is certainly more pride of ownership, I think, with the ZMF than there is with the HiFiMan because of each one being unique, because they are handmade and like the craftsmanship and the artistry on them are exquisite. Okay, those are not nothing. Okay, that's just going to be something for you, the potential end user, to consider. All right. Caldera Open versus Utopia, original Utopia anyway, and I used the affinity adapters on both of these and then used that Rhapsody cable in there for a comparison. The first thing that struck me here with this comparison is how similar they are. I had not expected that coming into this review. They actually are fairly similar. It's almost like dynamic and planar versions of each other almost. And that's because they both have like a dynamics forward kind of sound where they are energetic, they are punchy, and that sort of thing. They have a similar energy to the sound. Also, the shape and structure of their spatial presentations is very similar. I think the Utopia is just a hair bigger, but the overall, just the way they place things and the way they separate things and all of that kind of stuff is very, very similar in there. So like those two things, just the dynamics forward kind of presentation and then the shape and structure of their spatial presentations was like, whoa, hey, these two are actually quite similar to each other. Now, tonally, there are a few differences. On the right amp for Utopia, it has a little bit better bass extension and sub-bass presence, which gives it a little bit more slam. Okay, I think that the Utopia is also just a little bit more even in its tone through the treble as well. They have noticeably different mid-range tonality presentations though, where the emphasis on the mids for the Caldera is in the lower half of the mids. The emphasis on the mids for the Utopia seems to be on the upper half of the mid-range. And so some interesting results happened as a result of that. Something that is like orchestral and all of that, like I listened to the Imperial March, you know, from Empire Strikes Back soundtrack and all that. I preferred that on the Caldera. I thought the stringed instruments, because of that added warmth, they just sounded more natural, real, and organic in their tone and in their timbre to me. But, well, whereas on the Utopia there, they were just a little bit thin and bright sounding because they lacked some of that body and fullness there because of the slightly less lower mid-range presence there. Switching to something like Enter Sandman from Metallica, though, and the upper mid-range forwardness and bite from the Utopia gave like Hammett and Hetfield's guitars a little bit more aggression to them. They cut through the mix a little bit better, they hung in space a little bit better, and they just sounded a little bit more menacing, honestly, to my ears there. So like that was a track where I preferred Utopia just a hair over Caldera. Now, was Utopia bad for Empire Strike or for Imperial March? No. Was Caldera bad for Enter Sandman? No. We're just talking personal preferences to my ears here. Very close to each other, both sounding very good with a wide range of music genres, but it kind of just came down to genre and track as to which one that I would prefer between these two, given their overall similarities. Okay, now another thing that you have to take into consideration here is that the Utopia is very, very amp picky. The Caldera Open is not. Okay, all those signal chains that I mentioned earlier handled this fine, and it sounded pretty good on all of them, from the mid-fi chain all the way up through the really high-end chain, whereas Utopia is very, very hard to satisfy. Okay, and so even though like a used original Utopia right now can be had for like $2,500 US dollars anymore, that might seem like a really good deal, but the thing is like whatever gear that you already have to drive it, your amp, your DAC, if you're using a streamer, what have you there, like the Utopia may not work on that stuff very well. And now you're stuck with having to either swap out the headphone again, or upgrade your signal chain, get different source gear in there, which is going to put a dent in that value proposition that we talked about. Whereas with the Caldera Open, it sounds pretty good on just about everything I tried. I didn't find anything that I thought it sounded bad on. So if you buy this one, there's a very good chance that it'll sound pretty good with the gear that you already have. And then it will also scale up enough that down the road, when you are ready and have the funds to do a source gear upgrade on your own terms, you'll get another performance boost and hear more out of this headphone yet again. So those are things that you need to factor into the value proposition between original Utopia and the Caldera Open as well. Okay. Original Susvara. Okay, this is where things really became clearer here, where the Susvara is the better headphone. It has the more natural and more organic timbre to it. It has more resolution. It is even more three-dimensional and holographic in its spatial presentation, and so on and so forth. I mean, it is the superior headphone. I wouldn't call it a blowout. It's not like, oh, so much amazingly better that I can't recommend anything else ever, but it is clearly a superior to the Caldera here. Okay, the Caldera can match or surpass the Susvara in terms of like that mid-bass impact and dynamics. But that's about it. Okay, so, but then we got to come back to that signal chain issue, and then we'll talk about the value. Okay, both of these sound pretty good on most signal chains, right? Like, but the Susvara, while it always sounds sweet and nice, and so it kind of masks when it's not loving the signal chain that it's on a little bit. It can be hard to tell. It does still need a lot of power, like a lot of power. So again, it's one of those things where even though like I just saw used one of these go on Hi-Fi, we used Susvara go on Hi-Fi for like $28.50, I think. Go on Headfi. Did I say Hi-Fi? It's on Headfi. Go for about $28.50. Really good deal for this, but do you have the chain to drive that? Okay, is the question at that point, and that's what you have to figure out for the value proposition. Now, at MSRP, $6,000, $3,500. Is the Susvara $2,500 better than the Caldera? On some source gear, it might be, but you got to spend a huge amount of source gear to get there. I think for most people, no, it's probably not worth $2,500 more. If you can get a brand new Susvara under $4,500 or under $4,000, where it gets a lot closer to this, and you have a nice powerful head amp, then maybe the return on investment for Susvara over Caldera becomes worth it. But I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. Just hunt around for deals and so forth and see if that happens. Okay. But with all of that out of the way, I think we can come back to the Caldera and we can talk about like where it fits in the headphone market. And again, I think it's a pretty solid all-around headphone, and I enjoyed listening to it quite a bit over a wide variety of music genres and over a wide variety of signal chains. Okay. I think the Caldera is arguably right now the second best sonic value in really high-end / top-of-the-line headphones. I think on pure sonics, the brand new HE1000 Unveiled just edges this one out in terms of the value proposition. Now, this unit, the Caldera, is older than the HE1000 Unveiled, and the HE1000 Unveiled is another one of those products from HiFiMan that has kind of come along, and it's starting to reset the market. So that's a little bit of an unfair comparison, just because, again, the Caldera has been around for what, 2, 3, maybe 4? I don't know. It's been around for a few years now. Okay, so that's a little bit unfair, but this still holds its value. The Caldera still holds its value pretty well. And that's because, to my ears, it outperforms things like the Dan Clark Expanse, okay, the Final D8000 series, the Abyss Diana series, just as examples there, which are all slightly more expensive. Because I say it's about even in performance with the HE1000 Unveiled, with the original Focal Utopia, okay, in there and so forth, like, because it's about even to those, and I have heard those compared directly to a D8000 or an Expanse or the Abyss Dianas and all of that, I can confidently say that I think these are better than those. That's just my opinion. Others out there will disagree. That's just where I come down on this. I would also put like the Meze Elite and the Meze Empyrean in this category too, where I will take the Caldera Open personally. I will take the Caldera Open over those any day. The fact that the Caldera Open, though, starts at $3,500 US, where all of those that I just named are like 4,000 plus, save for the HE1000 Unveiled, I think you can start to see the value proposition that these open here, these provide up in that TOTL-ish range, okay, of headphones there. So I think it's a really solid product. And then, of course, you also get that unique, each unit being unique, the artisanal nature of ZMF, the exquisite craftsmanship, and the aesthetic that comes with that. And, of course, if it matters to you, you are supporting a U.S. domestic company there, which that matters to some and it doesn't to others there. But for those to whom it matters, that is also a consideration. So well done to Zach and the team over here. Over there at ZMF. I really like this one. Good job. It gets my recommendation. And so we'll leave it there. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the stock flavor of the ZMF Caldera Open. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Generally do those things that you do to support YouTube channels. There we go. And as always, enjoy the music.